This is the story about Brunswick bowling and how they turned bowling from underpaid workers into America's favorite pastime. It all started with John M. Brunswick in 1845 when he moved to America and wanted to make carriages. Yep, carriages. Which he was then distracted by some billiards and started making that equipment instead of carriages, and they still make it to this day under the name Brunswick Billiards. Brunswick then started to make the approaches, balls, ball returns, pins, and every kind of equipment that you would need for a bowling alley, and he even made the pony pins, which were popular during the 18 and 1900s. One of bowling's biggest problems, however, was the pin chasers stationed at the back of every lane to set up pins by hand, which would give inconsistent racks every time and were underpaid. So Brunswick made the device embedded into the pin decks, which would protrude a peg up into the hole on the bottom of each pin to help them reset faster and more accurately. Brunswick also went on to make the B1 semi-automatic pin setting device, which helped pin chasers set up the pins much more consistently and a lot faster. They also made the B10 semi-automatic pin setter, which used a motor to lower the pins instead of being done manually. However, the race between AMF and Brunswick to make the first automatic pin setter was interrupted by a completely unseen force, which was Gottfried Schmidt, who made the first pin setter in 1936 and sold the patent to AMF in 1941. Not to mention that this pin setter is almost nothing like the ones that you would see today. It was bulky, it was large, it had tons of moving parts, which I guarantee would not last very long, and it overall just wasn't that great. Even though AMF had the patent from that pin setter that Schmidt made, it still wasn't reliable enough to go into bowling alleys, so AMF made the 8230, which was their own pin setter released in 1946. But what does this have to do with Brunswick? Well, this whole time Brunswick was developing their own prototypes to make pin setters that were better than all the rest. Now, these prototypes were still extremely complicated and very bulky, which wouldn't have been good enough to put into bowling alleys all across America. Now, Brunswick knew that they weren't good enough, and even though they did showcase two different prototypes in an advertisement which aired on American TV, they stated multiple times that these pin setters were not ready for production because they still had wrinkles that needed ironing. Even though both of these prototypes were capable of resetting pins and spotting them if they had slid off spot, they still weren't ready for production, which was most likely because they just had too many parts or weren't reliable enough to be put in bowling alleys. These prototypes did lead Brunswick on the right track, and they soon had a product when they released the Model A pin setter. The Model A was released in the 1950s, and the first models were installed in 1956. Brunswick's pin setter was different from the rest, as it actually didn't have a conveyor belt in the pit, it actually had a board that would shake back and forth. This pin setter was also different from the AMF pin setter, as it had two separate wheels, one of them for the ball and one that would take the pins up to the next stage of the pin setter. This was also the only machine at the time that used a turret to drop pins into the setting deck and then onto the pin deck. It's also important to note that automatic scoring wasn't invented yet, so it was done by hand on score sheets like this. The Model A's success was extremely evident as it had been installed in alleys left and right and was soon being used in tournaments. In 1957, Brunswick released the first 5-pin bowling pin setter known as the A50. This pin setter was amazing, as it enabled an entire nation to have automatic bowling. The A50 and the Model A looked extremely similar. One of the major differences, however, was the A50 was triggered by a button on the ball return that would enable the pin setter to cycle. Another thing worth mentioning is the pins themselves. For a very long time, pins were made entirely of raw wood. Later on, the Brunswick Royalty line of pins had a UV-hardened coat of paint. This coat of paint didn't last very long in pin setters, so pins became plastic-dipped and later fully plastic-coated. And then in 1962, the Magna Bowling Pin Company made the first entirely synthetic bowling pin. The Magna pins didn't act very well, and synthetic pins only really caught on later, but we'll get to that. Even though Brunswick had just made the world's first 5-pin bowling pin setter, naturally what you go do is you make another one.
Brunswick's next release was the A51 Freefall 5-pin bowling pin setter, which was pretty much the same as the A50, it just had a different elevator and cycled slightly faster. For some reason, there are zero videos I could find on the internet of this machine, but there are some low-quality photos of it.
There is also no exact release date, but I do know that it was released before 1960.
I know that they were released before 1960 because in this book there's a picture of Chinook Bowladrome before it opened, and they had the A51s as their original pin setters, and this picture was taken in 1960. I've even confirmed with the current owner that they had the A51s when they opened, and you can even see the sweep in the picture.
It also doesn't exist as far as Google is concerned, but whatever. On to the next pin setter. While I couldn't find an exact release date, Brunswick did make a free-fall rubber band duckpin bowling pin setter in about 1960, and the way I found the model number is actually kind of crazy. The website of Darling Lanes, which is the last lane that has these machines, has this photo of their mechanic, and if you zoom in, you can see DP100 on the model number, meaning this is the DP100 pin setter. There are some short clips coming from their Facebook page, and they show the elevator, which looks like an A51, and the turret system sort of like a Model A. And this is the only free-fall machine Brunswick would ever make for rubber band duckpin. There is, however, a 1960 Brunswick catalog that includes a free-fall rubber band duckpin machine. This machine was made by Bullmore, and it is not confirmed whether Brunswick had an install contract with Bullmore, but they did sell their pin setters. You remember the Model A pin setter? Brunswick did the exact same thing that they did with the A50 and the A51, and they modified a couple things and turned it into their next pin setter, the A2 pin setter. The A2 was released in 1962, and the A and the A2 are extremely similar. The main differences being the A was a lot slower than the A2, and the A2 was quite a bit faster. They do have different kickback setups and cushion setups as well. The A2 was then installed in countless bowling alleys across America, and many of them are still in use today. During this time, Brunswick also produced the extremely popular Score King plastic-coated 10 pins, 5 pins, duck pins, rubber band duck pins, and even candle pins, and the Score King 10 pin is still produced to this day. Brunswick discontinued the 5-pin rubber band duck pin and candle pins, and when I reached out and asked them why, they said it was such a small niche market and they couldn't get costs low enough to continue it, so they stopped it altogether. Brunswick's next pin setters were released many years later with the 81.5 and the 81.10. The 81.5 is Brunswick's 5-pin string pin setter, and many of the parts are compatible with other 5-pin string machines. These machines are overall pretty cool, and many of them are still in use today. The 8110 has 10 strings, and while I couldn't confirm if it was used in 10-pin bowling, I do know that it is used in rubber band duckpin bowling. I also couldn't confirm an exact release date, but some sources say it was released in 1981. Brunswick's next pin setter is Free Fall with the introduction of the GS10 pin setter in 1985. This pin setter looked like no other pin setter and had many new features and some weird parts, to say the least. This pin setter didn't really catch on, but it was the first pin setter in the GS line, which would transform bowling forever. The GS10 was then upgraded into the GS92 in 1992. This was then upgraded to the GS96 in 1995, and then the GS98 in 1997. This then became the GSX in 1999, which is one of the most common pin setters today. The GS series also prevents bounce outs by dropping the sweep immediately after the ball passes. Back to the bowling pins, though. Besides the Magna pins, pretty much all pins had a wood core with a plastic coating until 1999 when Twister released their fully plastic bowling pin. This pin tended to slide around, but overall it was a pretty good pin. The GSX also revolutionized bowling because you can now choose which pins are standing and practice certain spares. In 2015, Brunswick released the String Pin Setter, which was a 10-pin bowling string machine. It's a well-designed pin setter and is mainly used in arcade settings. In 2022, Brunswick released their most modern freefall pin setter, the GS NXT. It has a different sweep design, faster cycling than other pin setters, and numerous safety features. In 2022, Brunswick released the strongest synthetic bowling pin ever made, which is the Brunswick Max Life. And in 2023, they released an upgraded version of the string pin setter with a Boost ST string machine. Later in 2023, Brunswick released their social duckpin lanes, which are shorter duckpin lanes that use a string pin setter. Brunswick's success over the years has made their company being worth over $100 million, but that begs the question, what's next for Brunswick? Is it a new sort of pin or pin setter or other sort of product? Well, we'll just have to find out. Anyways, there's a lot of effort being put into this video, so thank you very much for watching.